This lecture will cover the subtopic Politics in an Age of Passion, and the focus question is, what issues made the politics of the 1790s so divisive? President Washington embodied national unity and the virtue of Republican self-sacrifice, having retired from public life after the war. His vice president, John Adams, was an important political leader of the Revolution. Washington's cabinet included Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State and Alexander Hamilton as head of the Treasury Department. He formed a Supreme Court with John Jay as its Chief Justice. But a financial plan proposed by Hamilton frayed national unity. Taking Great Britain as his model, Hamilton wanted to stabilize the nation's finances, garner the support of powerful financiers, and foster economic development. He hoped to make the United States a world military and commercial power. To establish the government's creditworthiness, Hamilton proposed that it pay off at full face value all national and state debts from the Revolution. He wanted to create a new national debt, issued as interest-bearing bonds to government creditors that would tie wealthy investors to the national government. He wanted to establish a Bank of the United States, modeled on the Bank of England, that would act as the nation's financial agent, a private corporation that would hold government funds, make loans to the government, and make profits for stockholders. To raise revenue, he proposed a tax on whiskey. And in a report on manufactures, Hamilton called for a tariff and government subsidies to develop factories that would produce domestically goods that at the time were imported from abroad. Though American financiers, manufacturers, and merchants supported Hamilton's vision of the nation as a powerful commercial republic, many had a different vision. His plans for close ties with Britain alarmed James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who looked not to Europe but to westward expansion as ensuring a prosperous Republican future. They disliked urban growth and manufacturing, and did not want economic policy that catered to bankers and business leaders. They hoped America would be a republic of independent farmers who sold their goods to the world through free trade. Jefferson and Madison feared that a powerful central government, if allied with a growing class of commercial capitalists, would endanger American freedom. Initial opposition to Hamilton's program came from the South, which lacked investors and owners of government bonds, where support for manufacturing and a diversified economy was weak, and whose states had paid off much of their war debt. Hamilton argued that the Constitution's clause giving Congress the power to enact laws for the general welfare authorized his plans, but opponents, known as strict constructionists, argued that the federal government could use only the powers that were stated explicitly in the Constitution, which they charged did not authorize a national bank. A compromise secured Hamilton's fiscal program minus subsidies for factories in exchange for locating the nation's capital between Virginia and Maryland. This became Washington, the District of Columbia. The French Revolution of 1789 deepened political divisions in America. At first, almost all Americans celebrated the Revolution as it seemed inspired by their own revolution and republic. But the turn in France in 1793 to a more radical revolution, marked by the execution of King Louis XVI and aristocrats, and war between France and Great Britain polarized Americans. Jefferson and his followers thought the French Revolution, despite its extremism, was a victory for self-government everywhere. To Washington and Hamilton and their followers, the Revolution invited anarchy, and they believed America should befriend Britain. But since the American Revolution, the United States had been a permanent ally of France. In 1793, Washington declared that the United States would be neutral in the war between France and Britain. But he also moved to expel a French envoy, Edmond Genet, for trying to recruit American ships to attack British vessels. At the same time, Britain seized American ships and sailors. John Jay negotiated a controversial treaty in 1794 that effectively canceled the American-French alliance and recognized British commercial and naval supremacy. By the mid-1790s, two parties appeared in Congress calling themselves Federalists and Republicans. Both parties claimed the language of American liberty, and each accused the other of conspiring to destroy that liberty. The Federalists supported the Washington administration, favored Hamilton's economic program, and wanted ties with Britain. Well-to-do merchants, farmers, lawyers, and established political leaders, especially in the North, tended to support the Federalists. They were generally elitist and saw society as a fixed hierarchy in which political office should go to wealthy men who expected deference from lesser men. They feared that the spirit of liberty generated by the Revolution was degenerating into anarchy. The Federalists may have been the only major party in American history forthrightly to proclaim democracy and freedom dangerous in the hands of ordinary citizens. The Whiskey Rebellion of 1794 broke out when backcountry Pennsylvania farmers tried to block collection of the new tax on distilled spirits. Invoking the symbols of 1776, they based their actions on the symbols of liberty, reinforcing the Federalist insistence that such ideas were dangerous in the hands of the citizenry. Washington dispatched 13,000 militiamen to quell the resistance, and accompanied them himself, the only time a president has actually commanded an army in the field. His response was designed to restore order for the impression on Europeans who did not believe American self-government could survive. The Republicans, led by Madison and Jefferson, seemed to embrace popular politics. They supported France and had more faith in democratic self-government. Southern planters, ordinary farmers around the country, and urban artisans who sympathized with the French Revolution supported this party. They were far more critical of social and economic inequality, and more congenial to broad democratic participation by ordinary Americans than the Federalists. Each party believed that only itself was legitimate and representative of all the nation's interests, with Federalists denouncing Republicans as French agents, anarchists, and traitors, and Republicans denouncing Federalists as monarchists. For both sides, the other party was deemed an illegitimate faction and an enemy of American liberty and the Revolution's principles. The partisanship of the 1790s expanded the public sphere and the democratic content of American freedom. It increased the number of citizens who attended political events and read newspapers. Ordinary men never before active in politics wrote pamphlets and organized political meetings. These men included members of the Democratic Republican societies inspired by the Jacobin clubs of Paris. They openly supported the French Revolution and praised American and French liberty. Federalists viewed them as illegitimately usurping the representative authority of the government. Washington dismissed them as self-created societies. They justified their existence by claiming that the people had a right to debate political questions and organize to influence government policy. They believed that political liberty involved more than just voting and included popular organizing and pressure tactics. Although the societies soon disappeared, they were absorbed by the emerging Republican Party, which also found support among radical British immigrants who defended the French Revolution, such as Thomas Paine. The democratic spirit of the 1790s also invigorated discussion of women's rights. In England in 1792, Mary Wollstonecraft published A Vindication of the Rights of Women, in which she argued that rights should be extended to women. While not challenging traditional gender roles, she argued that women should have greater access to education and a role and representation in government. The expanding public sphere of the 1790s offered opportunities for American women to participate in politics, and a small but growing number of women published political and literary writings in American newspapers. One of these, Judith Sargent Murray, insisted that women should have equal access to education. If women seemed intellectually inferior to men, she argued, it was because they were denied an opportunity to learn. Women were still not part of the body politic. Although women were counted in determining representation in Congress, and nothing in the Constitution explicitly limited rights to men, the document and almost all Americans assumed that politics was an exclusively male sphere. The men who wrote the Constitution did not envision the active and continuing involvement of ordinary citizens in the affairs of state. But political parties sought to mobilize voters for highly contested elections, while self-created societies, stirrings of women's political consciousness, and even armed rebellions broadened and deepened the democratization of public life set in motion by the American Revolution.